This is The Wire for 2300 Zulu, January 21st, 2025. Precedence is routine. Information cutoff is 2200. Bottom line up front. Controversy erupts as D.C. Central Prison hesitates to comply with Trump pardon of J6 prisoners. Beginning with international events, in the United Kingdom, controversy has emerged once again following developments in the case of the Southport murders. On Monday, the mugshot of the attacker, Axel Rudakabana, was released to the public after months of suppressing the courtroom sketches of him and mainstream media using photos of him when he was a child. As confirmed by the mugshot, the attacker is an adult, not a child. Additional details have confirmed that the attacker did indeed have terrorist ideations, a detail that was deliberately covered up and denied from the very start, even though authorities knew this was true. Analysts comment, "This move was probably timed to coincide with Trump's inauguration so that global media organizations were occupied with the shenanigans across the pond, and not focusing on tensions in Britain becoming inflamed again. When this story initially broke, British citizens were targeted, fired from their jobs, and in many cases arrested for stating the known facts of this case. That Axel Rudakabana was indeed not an 8-year-old child, as the British government attempted to push, and was instead a full-grown man with direct and open terroristic ideations. Now that these details have been confirmed as being true, the British public are wondering why they were arrested for stating these facts months ago. In Panama, anti-American sentiment is mounting following the statements by President Trump indicating efforts to return control of the Panama Canal to the United States. Analysts comment, limited demonstrations and flag-burning events were reported in Panama City overnight, though these protests appear to be fairly limited at the moment. On the home front, in Washington, D.C., overnight substantial issues were reported at multiple federal prisons hosting the J6 political prisoners that were pardoned by President Trump yesterday afternoon. Most of the trouble appears to originate at the Washington, D.C. Central Prison. At this facility specifically, despite the clear and lawful order, many prison staff members refused to release the pardoned prisoners in clear, direct, and open violation of the order. Beyond this, several J6 prisoners who had communication with the outside world reported being abused and assaulted by the corrections officers at their facility after the pardon order was announced. As of this report, there are still approximately 21 J6 prisoners who have not yet been released, over 24 hours after Trump pardoned them. In Oregon, limited skirmishes were reported at an ICE detention facility in Portland overnight. Analysts comment, so far, initial indications suggest the usual Antifa suspects were involved, and the summary of events is not entirely outside the norm of activity for that region. Around the country, nationwide immigration raids have begun, with deportation operations beginning in several major cities. As expected, the claims of immigration raids taking place throughout Chicago were accurate, and the rescheduling of this raid was of course a ruse intended to deceive locals into thinking that the plan had been rescheduled due to the previous leak. Analyst comments for this wire. Though the details are sketchy at best, reports emerged overnight indicating corrections officers intentionally stonewalled the release of J6 prisoners, which in some cases may have included the beating of the prisoners. At the Washington, D.C. Central Prison facility, at least one person was observed exiting the facility on a medical gurney, though the circumstances of this medical evacuation remain unconfirmed. Many prisoners inside the facility, i.e. the ones with access to electronic devices, reported that the guards were beating prisoners severely. Again, sourcing remains dubious at best for some of these reports, however the blatant refusal to release prisoners remains confirmed via video evidence. Of course, it must be noted that prison releases take time, sometimes more time than one might think. Sometimes the paperwork alone takes several hours. However, this decision did not occur in a vacuum. Presidential pardons and acts of clemency are a much different story. Over the weeks leading up to an inauguration, various transition teams and committees are hard at work to make sure that the nation itself doesn't grind to a halt at noon on Monday. As such, the clemency paperwork would have already been distributed and the process completed before the pardon came into effect. Per long-standing history surrounding presidential pardons, as soon as the president signs the page, before the ink even dries, that prisoner should be walking out of the front door. This obviously did not happen, and a plethora of data indicates that this is not simply impatience with the release process, but a deliberate stonewalling effort by guards to drag their feet and hesitantly and slowly eventually comply with the presidential order. Regarding the sheer audacity of the law enforcement officers who openly and flagrantly violated presidential pardon orders, this exceptionally bold activity is not unexpected at all. This is sometimes the unfortunate nature of regime change and the sharp reality of the nature of political policing. Speaking more generally of historical cases of political prisoners, these types of incarcerated individuals are not like every other prisoner. Even more broadly, history has well documented what sometimes happens to military prisoners of war at the end of a conflict when their camp is about to be overrun. done. As poignant as it sounds to equate this history with what's going on right now at the DC Central Prison facility, some form of this may be helpful to think about when trying to understand what's going on here. Law enforcement and corrections officers, in cases of guarding special prisoners, are sometimes selected for their duties based on ideology. Absolutely zero guards were placed anywhere near the J6 prisoners who disagreed with their political imprisonment. In short, the guards placed in control of J6 prisoners almost certainly had personal and sometimes emotional interest in their treatment. As such, these guards were never really likely to just walk away from their task voluntarily, with many probably seeking to get their beatings in while they can. This is the unfortunate but historically indicated reasoning as to the boldness of openly violating Trump's order. This concludes The Wire for 2300 Zulu, January 21st, 2025.